Video game teasers are a bit frustrating.
And they can make expectations unreasonable.
Let's talk about it. Welcome to another episode of Spot On, which is looking very different this week. Lucy's away for a bit, and that means that the show is going to look a bit unconventional for a few weeks. We're thinking 3 weeks, but then we'll be back to normal. Lucy will be back and we'll be in the studio. We may even do some in-studio episodes in the 3 weeks that Lucy is gone, but for now we're doing it remote. And also it's because I wanted to get in the one and only Jeff Grubb.
I'm glad to be here. Yeah, this is Jeff, fantastic.
We are talking about teasers today, and we're talking about it because we just had a bunch of big teasers and teasers for teasers, pre-teasers as I like to call them, and we are also rapidly approaching Game Awards. So now it seems like a good time to talk about how games are teased and how we react to them and how expectations are impacted by them.
A lot of gamers agree, maybe not across the board, but I think there's a general sense that a lot of times games get announced too early. Software is different than like a movie. A movie gets announced 5 years ahead of time, and you're like, yes, eventually someone's vision is going to come to a movie screen. That's fine. With games, it's like, well, technology is always advancing, and so it kind of puts us in this uneasy state of, okay, what should we be expecting from a project like this? And so the longer that teasing process, and depending on how they tease it, we can feel very different about these games.
There's a bunch of publishers that take different approaches, and some, like, I think Nintendo and maybe PlayStation to a degree, definitely Rockstar, they just keep everything close to their chest. Like, they won't tell you anything until they are absolutely sure with what's going on.
We know why they can afford to do that, right? It's Nintendo, it's Rockstar. And I think every publisher probably wishes they were in that situation. So when we start talking about these other studios and other publishers, it's with the recognition that they aren't Nintendo, they aren't Rockstar, and a lot of times they have to do things differently, or they feel like they need to do things differently to stand out.
That is a very important distinction to make, because throughout these discussions, we realize that there's a bunch of different factors that can cause it, and we do talk about some in relation to BioWare in a lot of ways, but there's also like financials and stuff like that. But there's also a kind of like a plan that you need to have in place to be like, once this ball starts rolling, there's no stopping it. So we need to figure out how we approach it. So looking at BioWare recently, we know that BioWare is making a new Dragon Age. We know that BioWare is making a Mass Effect, but it's been so long since we've had anything meaningful about either of these two games.
But BioWare is a really interesting case, right? Because they're kind of on both sides of the extremes, where we get these teases years and years early, and then they're silent for a very long time, and then they don't have anything really until it's much closer. And that seems to be exactly where we're at with Dreadwolf.
BioWare obviously was a crown jewel in EA's like studios portfolio between Dragon Age and Mass Effect. And then they had Andromeda and Anthem, and there was a big hit to that reputation. Yes. Along comes Dragon Age, and people are like, oh shit, BioWare are doing the thing that we love. They're giving us Dragon Age. Dragon Age seen as more the niche title compared to Mass Effect, even though it still sells really well.
So,
but
yeah, does very well.
It feels like one for the fans, you know, they're coming back to that fantasy universe. And then later on, Mass Effect happens. And in both cases, it seems like they were announced much before they should have been, because it's evident in the information that we've had since then, right? Which is no concrete details.
While they announced Dreadwolf in 2022, they had teasers at the Game Awards a long time ago. I think it was like 2018. Take the timeline all the way back to there. We're getting a little bit info, not even really info, but just a suggestion, a hint of life. Back in 2018, this game might not come out until 2024. That is a very long time. They're doing exactly the same thing, it seems like, with Mass Effect. Yeah. Which is, they haven't released Dreadwolf yet. We had, like you said, we haven't really even had any information, real concrete stuff in some time. And yet now N7 Day comes along. It seems to be coming from a place of, well, it's N7 Day, we should do something. And they did. And now that game is, as far as I've heard, I wouldn't expect it before 2028 at the earliest, but 2029, 2030, that's not off the table for that game. And so it's 2023. What are we doing here?
It almost like solidifies and compounds the need for something more, because you have a day like N7 Day come off, and I don't know about you, I definitely saw the sentiment on Twitter where that teaser came out. It was a whole rigmarole to get there, and then when it came out, people were like, okay, we got a teaser, watched it, and then we're like, we know nothing about the game still. It's a CG teaser. We had like a Mike Gamble come out and be like, this is in engine, but I know I saw people saying it, and I definitely felt like I felt kind of empty after that. I was like, I still don't have anything to really grab onto. Other than that teaser, what have I got? For N7 Day, I've got merch that I can buy, which is like not a great situation, and it has in a lot of ways become the tone of that game, which is exactly what they want to avoid, right? Like now we're in a situation where that frustration is part of the identity of Mass Effect for a lot of people.
Did have an opportunity like in 7 Day come along and ignore it for like several years in a row with new stuff, new teasers, which they have done recently. I could find that being difficult internally. And yet it's like, when is the right time? Maybe there is no right answer to that, but it also feels like that emptiness might end up chewing away at the confidence in this game. If we get a couple years from now and we still haven't heard anything new, that could be really troublesome for both the people working on the game and the fans of the series.
Developers and publishers usually want to get the game into a state where it's like a good vertical slice that they can show off. That can take, given how early we know this game is in development, that could take a good few years. So we are now looking at it, for people who are paying attention, now looking at staring down the barrel of another long wait until the next N7 Day when we'll get a crumb of more information.
I think it's very likely we might not get another crumb of information at any point, whether it's N7 Day, the Game Awards, Summer Game Fest, from Mass Effect for several years. Like we're more likely to get Dreadwolf DLC or something like that over the next couple of years than anything like from Mass Effect.
Like you look at Elder Scrolls, like the announcement of that Elder Scrolls, I'm sure financials paid into it, and it was around the time of acquisitions of Bethesda, but now that has become the elephant in the room. Todd Howard, if he appears, which he rarely does in public again, to talk about things, inevitably people are going to be like, what's going on with Elder Scrolls? And chances are no one's going to be able to say anything concrete, which again just begins that or perpetuates that cycle of frustration. Like, you told us this is the thing that we're going to get. Why won't you tell us anything about it? If the window is them teasing it, we go up to it and it's tinted, we can't see through. The natural response from people is to start scratching at that window and see if they can maybe chip away and have a look through and see something. And that manifests in people, now are so deprived of information that they start acting weird with it and reading too much into everything, where we've had situations where a company might change their Twitter banner image and suddenly people have figured out exactly when that game is being shown.
On the other hand, it's like game developers have learned a lot of times. They've touched that hot stove of telling us a lot and then that stuff getting used against them. I think, Bungie used to be a lot more communicative than they are now, and there's for good reasons. A lot of toxic fans in their community that frightened them away from that. I think Insomniac right now is trying to, they're teasing Daredevil stuff, and then they try to talk about their process of how they let Miles Morales become the main character in Spider-Man going forward, and that just freaks out fans who are like, oh, so Peter Parker's not going to be in the next game? They never said that, but that people have a real hard time of letting their imaginations get away from them.
Yeah, I guess that's the counterbalance to us, or the other side of the ask, where if we're telling developers, hey, or publishers specifically, hey, maybe don't say things or show us morsels of things if you know that you've got nothing meatier to give us within the next year that we can really use to, sink our teeth into. If we're telling developers and publishers that, gamers, we need to be a little more kind of accommodating for these situations where we're not freaking out at every little thing where it's happening and losing our minds and making assumptions, because that is how we end up in a situation where we're so far away from each other on the spectrum. We can't come to a middle ground where we're able to get teasers and then have things be maintained like a kind of semblance of being reasonable until the next the kind of major beat happens. Game Awards in the horizon, so we can expect all of this stuff to become very, very relevant in the next few weeks. Now that the N7 Day teaser is out there, I have already seen discussions that are saying Mass Effect is definitely going to be at the Game Awards. And not just that, and maybe it will, we don't know, but I've seen people being like, it is going to be there. I know it's going to be there. And not just that, I saw a conversation which was like, Mass Effect is going to be there, but Dragon Age is further along in development and coming out before Mass Effect. So that means Dragon Age will also be there, which is
Boy.
this is, again, maybe, but this is the scenario where it's like, all of these issues are kind of like rolling into a really bad situation where expectations are now high, and like if that kind of like train of thinking, that line of thinking carries on, we're gonna have a lot of upset people. And again, that comes to define the process of that game, the development cycle of that game. Yeah. It changes the tone that the people have towards developers. Like, if now these people who are definitely expecting Dragon Age to be there, if it doesn't show up, there's going to be a little more harshness towards BioWare and the development team and EA, like, where is this shit, etc., etc.
Another thing about that is troublesome until your disappointment becomes something more than disappointment. It's okay to be disappointed something didn't happen.
Yeah.
That's fine. It is when you then take that disappointment and project it and apply it to people who are actually doing the work here and blame them for your disappointment. The reality is we very well could get Dreadwolf content at the Game Awards. They've had teasers there before. It would make all the sense in the world for something to show up there. But then to expect one studio to have two pieces of major content to show off at one show, that is not really understanding how these things work.
If there's anything to take away from this, it's on the like publisher side, like, please stop doing these things where it's like you leave us disappointed and like giving us teasers for reasons that are other than the fact that you are ready to start telling people that these games are out. Like, we know that teasers are used for various other reasons, like shares, finances, and financial
hiring,
like,
people, getting
hiring
people to come
and
work on
that
your
kind
team.
of stuff.
Yes, we get that.
But we get it, but we also, from the other side, we need you to know that it does have a knock-on impact where you are now creating the expectation, or you're penciling in a timeline into people's minds that admittedly is not your fault, but it's still, the repercussions of it are still going to happen. And then from the gamer side, like, we've got to be a little more aware of the realities of game development and the fact that sometimes the thing that we want most isn't going to be there. That doesn't mean that it ain't going to show up soon. But we can't assume that it will. We have to be tempered in our expectations a bit. And we say that right now because Game Awards is coming and the Elden Ring DLC has been around for a really long time. Where is it? Like,
buckle up, boys.
Yeah,
Here we
buckle
go.
up, boys. This is mostly an episode for me, talking to myself. And it's really interesting because sometimes we have situations that turn that upside down on its head. And it is like, oh, the thing that we said we shouldn't do happened, did it, and it worked out exactly, which is the GTA scenario, right? Like, people were like, this week it's going to happen, next week, this week or next week. And then, you know, we're in a situation now where GTA has been teased.
I think it shows that there is no one right way to do any of this.
No.
It's just things to be mindful of. It is people put their emotions in this stuff. They put a lot of feelings into these things. And when I say people, I mean everyone involved. The people playing the games, making the games, funding the games.
But Jeff, thank you so much for stepping in last minute. Not last minute, actually. Like, well, kind of last minute. I hit you up the other day. I was like, you want to do this? And you were like, hell yeah, let's do it.
Let's go.
I appreciate that. Maybe you'll be back next week. Maybe I'll have someone else in. We'll find out. But in the meantime, Jeff, where can people find you?
Yeah, find me Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. We do Game Mess mornings. Tam usually hangs out with me on Friday. This week, he's already hung out. So go back to watch the Wednesday episode. It's a great episode. And then GiantBomb.com.
Yeah, and you can find me on giantbomb.com and also gamespot.com, and we'll see you next week for another episode of Spot On.